Good morning, everybody. Heens Jay, to all you fellow Muscogee citizens out there. I just want to do a little video about just that, Muscogee Creek citizenship. So, here is a topic that keeps coming up and has been coming up on the internet since the early 2000s. There's the issue of the Creek Freedmen and their role in our future and their past. Now, they do share history, and yes, they are descended from people that were once our slaves. Yes, Native Americans, particularly the 5 civilized tribes, did in fact own slaves. And Muscogee Nation was and is, I think, still part of the 5 civilized tribes. So, I'm sorry, I keep looking back at my breakfast. I'm cooking, getting ready for work here. But, so yeah, we own slaves, and their descendants were later on listed as being freedmen. However, there was the 1866 treaty, which granted them citizenship in the tribe. That is the legal basis behind why other 5 civilized tribes and their 1866 treaties, why some have been forced to bring the freedmen back in. Now, give you guys a little more background here. 79, Muscogee Nation, because we restructure ourselves, we were able to get democratic elections to elect our chiefs instead of having the federal government say, okay, this guy's your chief. We had a little more power in determining our own destiny, if you will, and it was Chief Claude Cox who was our first chief since the restructure, or at the time of the restructure. So he did a lot for the tribe. A lot that people may not recognize considering, this particular topic. But, and there's some that didn't like him. I talked to his nephew, Buddy, like years ago, back in 2011. I had a great conversation with the guy. He actually took me out to coffee after I went to Creek Nation Archive. And this is relevant because when I was at the archive doing my own genealogy, there was this lovely lady who was black, and she was trying to get some documentation together, and this documentation goes back to her great-grandfather, who was in fact Creek by blood. But her grandfather, I'm trying to remember this, either it was her grandfather, because she was older than me, by probably about 2 decades, so it was either her grandfather or great-grandfather that was the son of an actual Muscogee Indian from Hitchiti, Itawa, or Hitchiti tribal town. So, but he was listed as being dead at the time of the Campbell Creek Roll, which I think was finished by 1903. I think it began 1899, finished around 1903, 1906, something like that. So she was gathering her data, and I felt kind of bad for her because, she's not eligible to be a citizen, but she's one of those freedmen descendants that should be. See, the thing is, by the Campbell Roll, the Dawes Commission, the descendants of the slaves stopped being referred to as Creeks, as citizens, but they were referred to as freedmen. There's Creeks by blood, there's Choctaw by blood, there's Cherokee by blood, et cetera, et cetera. And that indicated those who actually for sure were Indians by blood. Whereas the freedmen were pretty much, that was a way to kind of, segregate, if you will, or separate basically the real Indians from blacks who were not actually citizens by blood. Some of them actually, again, like this one lady, she actually was Creek by blood. But the problem is, like, even though the Dawes roll listed, it was like either her great-grandfather or great-grandfather, great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather, I gotta remember this. I think it was her great-grandfather. I think it was 3 generations back. Even though he was listed as a son of a Creek man, that Creek man was not alive, and therefore, because the requirements that you have to be, descended from someone who was a citizen by blood at the time of the final Dawes roll, this lady's, again, maybe grandfather got excluded because, he and his descendants get excluded from that because he was listed as a freedman. His mother was black, just to kind of clarify that. So I feel for this lady. I feel for anybody in that situation. There are descendants of Lewis Perryman, people who are my relatives. Okay, you've got Benjamin Perryman is my ancestor. He's my 5th great grandfather. He was a chief. A bunch of his descendants were very important in the early Oklahoma period of tribal government. So his son Lewis Perryman, I believe, had a daughter by his slave, a daughter that he recognized. Now you got to understand, the Indians typically treated their slaves differently than a lot of white people are stereotypically viewed as treating their slaves. So there was definitely a different type of relationship, I would say, between like Indian master and white master. But there was Indians who treated their slaves really badly too. That did happen. Lewis is not one of those guys. Okay, he actually bought this one guy off of Quantrell himself, who then came back to steal the slave, which Lewis Perryman knew was going to happen, and that's why he bought the guy, is to protect him from Quantrell. Ironically, Quantrell would later kill, I think, both Lewis Perryman and this slave. But the slave was brought in basically as part of the family, as I understand it. The relationship was a very positive one. And anyways, Lewis did have a daughter that he recognized. That was, you know, by a slave woman, you know, that he owned. And the thing is, she married, if I recall correct, a black man but with the last name of Freeman, not to be confused with the freedmen, but his last name was Freeman. And as history would go, their descendants would be listed on the freedmen roll because they kept marrying back into the black population. They weren't marrying back into the actual Indian by blood population, it would seem. Then you have Legis C. Perryman, who's a another child of Lewis Perryman. He was actually principal chief of the tribe at one point. Moreover, he looked like he was black for the most part. Like, you look at pictures of the guy, I mean, his political opponents were criticizing him for looking black. Whether he actually had black blood or whether he was just a really dark Indian, I don't know. That's totally up for debate, I guess. I mean, as long as his father really was his father, then Legis Perryman really was my kinsman. So, you know, I don't really care anyway what else is in his ancestry. You know, if he was, you know, if he had a heavy amount of black blood there, then, you know, so be it. I'm just kind of curious, you know, about, was his dad really his dad, or was his mom mostly black, or was Lewis Perryman's mother of some African ancestry? Would that make me of African ancestry? Or does Lewis and my great-great-great-great-grandmother Mary Susan Perryman, do they in fact have different mothers, as I suspect many of Benjamin Perryman's children had? So this is kind of my, forget the light change, I'm trying to clean up my my breakfast mess here. I think Benjamin Perryman had several wives, and that was not uncommon for Creeks to have simultaneously. My great-great-great-grandfather, Jacob Knight, had 2 wives at the same time, and they were always fighting each other according to the pioneer accounts I've read. Anyway, back to the freedmen. So Legis C. Perryman, he did have descendants that were listed on the freedmen roll, that they were not considered Creek by blood. This is a mistake. That when you have a documented lineage, when freedmen descendants have a documented lineage back to actual Creek Indians by blood, I think our Constitution should be adjusted to bring them in, because they actually, you know, we don't have a blood quotient requirement. You just have to have an ancestor back to the final Dawes roll who's listed on the final Dawes roll as Creek by blood. The problem is it does exclude people that for sure had a well-documented, you know, or have a well-documented lineage back to somebody who was Creek by blood. Again, the lady's like great-grandfather or whatever was listed as, I mean, he was listed as Indian, but because he was dead at the time of the final Dawes roll, that technicality bars his descendants who were listed as freedmen. It's kind of a stupid technicality, in my opinion. But then you have a bunch of freedmen descendants who don't have any Creek Indian blood. They never married into the tribe. Sure, maybe they spoke Muscogee, maybe they went to the Canadian colored town, as their ceremonial grounds, but they weren't actually Creek Indian by blood. I mean, what's next? We're going to bring everybody who wants to be Indian, who want to be Indians, to actually, even if they learn our language and our customs, we're going to make them Creek Indians. I mean, we're having a hard enough time getting our own people to learn the language and the customs and go to the ceremonials. Tecabachi, no longer has an active ceremonial grounds. That's one of the original 4 grandmother towns. They don't have, because they lost the song. I learned this from one of the Tecabachi members. They don't have the song anymore. And without the song, they can't do the ceremonials. They have to open up with a song, okay? Like at the time, that we're going back to like 2011 here, again, because I was living back there in Oklahoma, and there was somebody who might have known the song, but they weren't sure if this person, there was some debate about that. And because that debate existed, there's like no way to really verify, and when the last person that they know for sure knew the song is gone. So Creek Nation has tribal towns, and these tribal towns, every member of every tribal town originally had a clan that they inherited from their mother's side. So unless your father was Muscogee Indian, your mother was like a white lady or a black lady, or back in those days, then you pretty much had a clan. But if your mother was not Indian, or she was part of a different tribe, then you did not have a clan, and you may not be considered a full member of the tribe. I'm Turtle Clan. I belong to Greenleaf. I've never gone to the ceremonials, but that's my ancestral town, and my matrilineage is Creek. So I've been told that we're Turtle Clan. So my son will not be, because he is not the son of a Muscogee woman. Okay, my wife looks Indian, but she's Colombian. So my son will still have citizenship rights because he is the son of me, and we don't have the requirement that your mother be Indian in order to be a member of the tribe. So we don't have a blood quotient requirement. We just require that you have some blood that goes back to the final Dawes rolls. Again, I think it should be slightly amended to include those who for sure have a documented Muscogee lineage back to earlier census records. It gets hard because after the Dawes Act, you do have better record keeping because of the state of Oklahoma. You have things like birth certificates, marriage records, death records, all that type of stuff. You got certificates for all that. Before that, none of that existed. In fact, a lot of people keep using the wrong age. Like they're off by a few years frequently on between one census and the next. So it's hard to even determine an actual birth year for a lot of full bloods. It's pretty notorious. Looking back at some of my own ancestry, it's like, really? My polygamous great-great-great-grandfather, he and his children were not being too consistent with their ages. So, but anyways, so yeah, that's the difficulty. So I understand on one hand why that requirement would exist. I also understand why the freedmen would be barred from the tribe, because they don't have the same blood, and there were checks being issued out apparently that I don't think my mom got, because she didn't live in Oklahoma, but there was freedmen descendants who were actually getting checks from the government. Now what's been happening is that people are trying to sue Muscogee Nation to get rights, citizenship rights. Maxine Waters is behind this. She's all about defunding the Muscogee Nation, or any Indian tribe that denies non-Indian blacks who used to be part of the tribe but who don't have the blood from having citizenship. It's like, you're not really Indian, you don't have the blood, but we have to give you equal rights as a citizen? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So to me, that's just another way to kind of water down our sovereignty, and I'm against it. Look, I'm not against people who have black skin being citizens of the tribe. I have a cousin, my cousin Sadie is black. Like her dad, her biological dad, I don't want to call him her dad, he disappeared, but she's half black. But her mom is my cousin, and we have the same great grandmother. We're all Turtle Clan. So it's, like she's Creek by blood, okay? I don't care what your skin color is. If you have the blood, you have a right to be a part of the tribe, okay? In my opinion. So, but if you don't have the blood, then you don't really have the right. And if you're suing us and antagonizing us and trying to support bills in Congress to take away the funding that is rightfully given to Native tribes who had their lands taken away from them by the federal government on the basis of an 1866 treaty that was done at a time where the Civil War not only decimated much of the United States, but definitely decimated the Indian Territory where these tribes, including Muscogee Nation, lived. Do you think that the Creek Nation had an actual consistent government, and was Cow Tom, who by the way was a former slave, who's also a translator, who's pretty instrumental at that time, but he's also very instrumental in the 1866 treaty. Okay, like he was not. It's not like he didn't have a vested interest in getting his own people citizenship in the Muscogee Nation. I mean, let's be real about that for a sec. Okay. Do you think the entire tribe was on board with that? Or was it just a handful of people, which is what it was? It was a handful of people that put this together. So, and to be honest, I'm sure the federal government had no problem restricting citizenship of a certain amount of blacks, restricting U.S. citizenship, because, by the way, Indians at the time were not U.S. citizens. Okay, just throwing that out there. I'm sure the federal government, the feds had no problem, giving citizenship to these people, to another nation, okay, which is what the Muscogee Nation was. But we became under the thumb of Congress because of the removal period and everything following that. So I challenged the legitimacy of the 1866 treaty on the basis that it was really thrown together in a time where we did not have a consistent tribal government, and you had non-citizens who were involved in the creation of that. Okay, it wasn't just Muscogee blood members discussing this with Congress. You had other people with other interests, and those interests are not necessarily in the best interest of the Muscogee people. So, and definitely not long term. And look, Claude Cox knew that. I mean, look, after a while, if you have more blacks than Indians in the tribe, who runs the tribe? Who's really Indian after a while? Think about that. So yeah, I mean, there's good reason to restrict citizenship. So I agree with Claude Cox. But he didn't tell me that when we had our little discussion, but we did discuss other aspects of politics. I think he was sympathetic to that woman that was there, as am I. To this day, I mean, she should be part of the nation. Okay. But it's definitely an issue. I don't like the fact that people try to sue Muscogee Nation for citizenship. It's a load of crap. So, morning, baby. Anyways, I better get going, eat my breakfast, go to work. But I want to share this important part of Muscogee Nation history, and I'd like to see what your thoughts are on the subject, because it's very near and dear to me. I was reading articles last night that kind of got my blood pumping again. So, hope you guys have a great day. Let me know what you think.